Never store raw meat like this because the mistake looks harmless, feels responsible, and for years seems like it's doing absolutely nothing. Until after 50, when it starts hitting your heart and arteries in ways nobody warned you about. This isn't about some dramatic food poisoning horror story. It's about the quiet stuff. The kind of everyday fridge habit you've probably done 1,000 times without thinking. You bring groceries home, tuck the meat away where it fits, close the door and move on. Clean kitchen, organized fridge. Done. But raw meat doesn't just sit there politely. It leaks, it drips, it ages, it reacts with air, and it spreads things you can't see. Especially in a fridge that opens and closes all day. And after 50, your body stops brushing those things off. Inflammation lingers longer. Blood vessels get more sensitive. Recovery isn't instant anymore. In this video, you're going to see why one common way people store raw meat quietly stresses the heart. How? It can trigger inflammation that damages arteries over time, and the simple storage shift that protects your food and your future health without turning your fridge into a science lab. Because this is one of those small habits that doesn't matter until suddenly it really does. The mistake almost everyone makes without realizing it. Let's start with the most common scenario. You get home from the store, you've got bags in both hands, something's melting, something's sweating. You open the fridge and look for the fastest open space. Maybe it's the middle shelf, maybe it's the top shelf, maybe it's wherever there's room. So you set the raw chicken, beef, or fish there and shut the door. Nothing explodes, nothing smells, nothing feels wrong. And that's exactly why this mistake is so dangerous. Raw meat releases juices even when the package looks sealed. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's microscopic, but gravity always wins, and whatever is below that meat is now in the splash zone, leftovers, produce, sauces, fruit, that container you'll eat straight from later. Most people think, I'll cook it anyway, but that only applies to the meat, not the food underneath it. And once bacteria land on ready-to-eat foods, cooking the meat later doesn't undo what already spread. Now here's where this stops being just a food safety issue and starts becoming a heart and artery issue after 50. When your body fights off bacteria, even mild exposure, it triggers an inflammatory response. In younger years, your system cleans it up fast. After 50, inflammation sticks around longer. Blood vessels don't relax as easily. The immune response costs more. You may never connect the dots because you didn't get sick, but your body still paid the bill. Why this hits harder? After 50, even if you've always done this, a lot of people say, I've stored meat like this my whole life and I'm fine. That's not proof the habit is harmless. It's proof your body used to be better at buffering mistakes. After 50, a few things change quietly. Your immune system responds more slowly but more intensely. Inflammation takes longer to shut off. Blood vessels are less flexible and more reactive. Recovery from stress, physical or internal, is slower, so small repeated inflammatory hits that used to disappear now linger, and chronic, low-grade inflammation is one of the biggest enemies of artery health. That's why infections, even mild ones, are linked to higher risk of heart events in older adults. Not because bacteria attack the heart, but because the inflammatory cascade stresses the cardiovascular system. Improper raw meat storage doesn't need to cause food poisoning to be a problem. It just needs to keep nudging your body into defense mode over and over again. The "it looks clean" illusion. One of the reasons this mistake survives for decades is that it looks clean. Raw meat comes wrapped, sometimes double wrapped. There's plastic, foam, an absorbent pad. It feels contained. But those trays are designed for transport and display, not long-term storage in a fridge that vibrates, shifts, and warms slightly every time you open the door. Tiny leaks happen, condensation forms, juices pool under the meat. And when temperature fluctuates, bacteria have more opportunity to grow. You might never see a drop, you might never smell anything, but your fridge isn't sterile, and raw meat is the riskiest thing you put in it. The door shelf disaster nobody thinks about. Now let's talk about a storage spot that feels logical and is absolutely not: the fridge door. People put meat there because it's easy, it fits, it keeps it separate. But the door is the warmest, most unstable part of the fridge. Every time you open it, the temperature jumps. Then it cools, then it jumps again. Raw meat does not like temperature swings. Bacteria love them. And after 50, even mild foodborne infections are more likely to hit harder, causing dehydration, blood pressure, changes, and systemic stress that puts extra load on the heart. Storing raw meat in the door is like putting your most sensitive food in the most chaotic environment possible and hoping for the best. Oxidation. When meat quietly becomes harder on your arteries. Here's a side of this conversation most people never hear. Raw meat doesn't just spoil from bacteria, it also oxidizes. When meat is exposed to oxygen, especially if it's loosely wrapped or stored too long, its fats start to break down. This creates compounds that change flavor and smell, but also increase oxidative stress in the body when consumed regularly. You know that smell that's not rotten, just off? That grayish color that wasn't there yesterday? That dryness that makes meat tougher and less appealing? That's oxidation. And oxidized fats are not friendly to artery health. They increase inflammatory burden and make blood vessels work harder to maintain balance. Again, one meal won't destroy anything, but repeated exposure over years, that's how arteries slowly lose flexibility and resilience. Poor storage accelerates this process. The dangerous, "I'll just cook it well" mindset. A lot of people think they're safe because they plan to cook the meat thoroughly. Cooking kills bacteria, but it doesn't undo everything that happened before cooking. If meat sat in conditions that encourage bacterial growth, toxins may already be present. If juice is already dripped onto other foods, cooking the meat doesn't clean the fridge. If oxidation already occurred, heat doesn't magically reverse it. And here's the behavioral trap. When meat looks or smells a little off, people compensate. They overcook it, they drown it in sauce, they add extra salt, they pair it with processed sides because it's already not great. Those adjustments quietly push meals in a direction that's worse for heart health. More sodium, more refined carbs, more inflammation. The thawing habit that turns storage into a health domino. Now let's talk about what happens before meat even hits the fridge. Counter thawing. It feels efficient. You're in a rush. You leave frozen meat on the counter for a bit, but the surface warms quickly right into the danger zone while the inside stays frozen. That's prime time for bacteria. Then you touch the packaging, you touch the counter, you touch the sink, you open the fridge, you grab spices. Cross-contamination spreads quietly, and if illness follows, even a mild one, it doesn't just mean stomach upset after 50, it can mean dehydration, blood pressure swings, and systemic stress that hits the heart harder than it used to. The safer methods, fridge thawing or cold water thawing, aren't glamorous, but they prevent a chain reaction your body would rather not deal with later. The sink myth that makes everything worse. Let's kill another habit that refuses to die. Rinsing raw meat. It feels clean. It feels responsible. It feels like something you were taught. But rinsing raw meat splashes bacteria around the sink area onto counters, utensils, towels, and hands. Then those surfaces interact with foods you won't cook. Now connect that to storage, because if bacteria spread during prep, they can end up on containers, shelves, and packaging that later touches other foods. Storage becomes the final link in a chain that started at the sink. After 50, repeated low-grade exposures matter more. Your immune system works harder, inflammation lingers longer, and the cumulative effect quietly wears on artery health. The one storage shift that changes everything? Here's the good news. You don't need a new fridge. You don't need special gadgets. You don't need to stop eating meat. You just need to change where and how raw meat lives. Raw meat belongs at the bottom of the fridge always. It belongs in a leak-proof container, not the store tray. It belongs away from foods you eat without cooking. It belongs in stable cold, not the door. That one shift reduces contamination. Risk slows oxidation and lowers the chances your body has to deal with invisible stress later. And when you reduce unnecessary stress, your heart and arteries thank you quietly over time. Because the biggest threats to heart health after 50 aren't always the dramatic ones. They're the habits that fly under the radar just until the body stops ignoring them. And there's one more raw meat storage mistake people make after they think they've done everything right when they wrap it up for the fridge that quietly undoes all the good they just did. That's what we'll uncover next. That mistake happens after people think they've solved the problem, after they've moved the meat to the bottom shelf, after they've decided to be careful, after they've told themselves, okay, I'm doing this right now. And then they grab the one thing that quietly undoes all of it. the wrapping mistake that turns safe storage into slow damage. Plastic wrap. It feels clean. It feels tight. It feels like a seal. You stretch it, press it down, smooth it over the tray or the meat itself, and slide it into the fridge feeling accomplished. But plastic wrap doesn't protect meat the way most people think it does. It traps moisture right against the surface of the meat. That moisture creates a humid microenvironment where bacteria can hang out longer and where oxidation happens faster. Instead of allowing the surface to stay cold and dry, plastic wrap keeps things damp, especially in a fridge that gets open and closed all day. That dampness speeds up two things your heart and arteries don't love over time: microbial growth and fat oxidation. And when meat starts breaking down faster, people respond in predictable ways. They cook it sooner than planned just to get it over with. They overcook it because it smells a little strong. They add more salt, more sauce, more bread to make it enjoyable. So even when you store it right, the wrapping choice can quietly push your meals toward higher sodium, more processed add-ons, and heavier digestion. A simple container with a lid, one that keeps meat cold but not sweaty, does a much better job at slowing that whole process down. The time trap. When meat becomes a background stressor, another habit that sneaks up on people is letting raw meat linger because it's out of sight. It's on the bottom shelf, it's wrapped. It's not bothering anyone, so it stays there, and suddenly you're on day 4, day 5, day 6, telling yourself it's still cold, it's probably fine. Here's the problem. Raw meat doesn't become more forgiving with time. Even if it's technically still safe, quality drops. Oxidation increases, smell changes, texture stiffens, and the longer it sits, the more likely you are to cook it under stress instead of intention. Stress cooking leads to shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to heavier meals. Heavier meals mean more sodium, more fat, and more digestive strain. Exactly what arteries struggle with after 50. This is why heart-healthy eating isn't just about what you eat. It's about how often you eat food that's already halfway past its prime. The simple rule most people ignore is the one that protects them the most. If you're not going to cook raw meat within a couple of days, freeze it immediately, not later, not tomorrow, immediately. Freezing stops the clock. Lingering doesn't. The refreeze problem nobody wants to admit. Now let's talk about a behavior people rarely confess: refreezing meat. Someone pulls meat out to thaw, changes plans, decides not to cook it, and puts it back in the freezer thinking it was only out for a bit. That bit matters. Each thawing and refreezing cycle damages meat structure, increases moisture loss, and accelerates oxidation. When that meat is eventually cooked, it's tougher, drier, and less satisfying, so people compensate with sauces, salt, and refined carbs. Again, not because they're careless, because their brain wants the meal to feel worth eating. Over time, this pattern pushes meat from protein centerpiece to vehicle for salt and sauce, which quietly shifts diets away from heart-friendly balance. If meat thaws, it should be cooked. If plans change, it should be cooked and then frozen as a cooked dish, not sent back through another raw cycle. That single decision reduces stress on your food and your arteries. The fridge crowding effect. When cold isn't cold enough. Here's something nobody thinks about until it matters: airflow. Fridges don't cool by magic. They rely on air circulation. When shelves are packed tight, especially around the bottom, cold air can't move properly. Pockets of warmer air form, and raw meat ends up sitting in uneven temperatures even though the fridge is set correctly. That inconsistency accelerates spoilage and bacterial activity. After 50, your margin for error with food safety narrows, not because you're weak, but because recovery is slower. Dehydration hits harder, inflammation sticks longer, and the stress response from even mild illness can affect blood pressure and heart rhythm. So if raw meat is wedged between containers, touching other items, or pressed against the fridge wall, it's not being stored optimally, even if it's technically on the right shelf. Space is part of safety. The cook it all at once overcorrection. Some people respond to all of this by swinging too far in the other direction. They buy meat, panic about storage, and decide to cook everything immediately, even if they don't need it yet. That sounds efficient, until it leads to another heart health trap: relying on reheated meat all week. Cooked meat that sits for days gets drier, tougher, and less appealing. So people drown it in sauces, cheese, bread, and salty sides to make it enjoyable again. And suddenly, the week's meals are heavier than planned. The smarter move is balance. Cook what you'll eat soon. Freeze what you won't. Don't force everything into the fridge cycle just to feel organized. Your arteries care less about efficiency and more about consistency. The heart connection. Most people miss. At this point, some people still think this is all food safety talk. It's not. Heart and artery health are deeply connected to inflammation. And inflammation doesn't only come from obvious places like sugar and smoking. It also comes from repeated immune activation, oxidative stress, and digestive strain. Poor raw meat storage increases all three. Even without obvious illness, your body can be dealing with small inflammatory challenges more often than it needs to. And after 50, those challenges don't disappear overnight. They accumulate. That's why people feel like their health suddenly changed in their 50s and 60s, when in reality the bill just came due for habits that were quietly charging interest for decades. The storage setup that actually protects your heart. So what does doing it right actually look like? Without turning your fridge into a lab, raw meat goes straight into a solid container the day you buy it, not later, not after it leaks, immediately. That container goes on the lowest shelf with space around it so cold air can circulate. If you're not cooking it within 2 days, it goes into the freezer in a freezer-safe wrap that limits air exposure, not loose plastic pressed against it. When thawing, it thaws in the fridge or in cold water, never on the counter. And once thawed, it gets cooked. No second guessing, no refreezing raw. That's it, no fear, no obsession, just a system that removes unnecessary stress from your food and your body. Why this matters even if you eat pretty healthy. Here's the final piece people underestimate. You can eat all the right foods and still undermine your heart if your storage habits quietly increase inflammation and stress. Raw meat is one of the few foods that can affect multiple systems at once: immune, digestive, and cardiovascular. So how you store it matters more than people realize, especially as the body ages. This isn't about perfection, it's about removing friction. When your fridge supports good habits, your meals are easier to cook, easier to enjoy, and easier on your arteries. When your fridge works against you, even healthy eating feels heavier. The best part about fixing raw meat storage is that nothing dramatic happens. You don't feel a sudden rush of energy. You don't lose 10 pounds overnight. What happens is quieter and better. Meals taste cleaner. You use less salt without trying. You don't feel that heavy, inflamed sensation as often. Your digestion feels calmer. Your body stops fighting small battles it shouldn't have to fight. And over time, that's how heart health is protected, not with extremes, but with fewer unnecessary hits. Because the goal after 50 isn't to overhaul your life. It's to stop doing the few things that quietly work against you. If this video made you rethink how you use your fridge, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment below. Where do you usually store raw meat right now? Top shelf, middle, door, bottom, or wherever it fits? That one answer reveals more about your future heart health than most people realize.